Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Outside the Box. I'm with some familiar faces here today. With us on this episode of the show, I'm with TriStar Strength and Rehab. I've got Zach Jackson over there, Josh Davis to my left. How you guys doing?
Pretty good, man. How are you?
Y'all look like y'all just came from the gym, working out, getting a pump in before this podcast.
Yeah, Zach just does it with a polo.
I was going to say, a little bit different style than Josh.
But it's stretchy, though. That way the pump kind of accommodates,
Before the show, they were doing some pull-ups, just to make sure that they're ready to go. But I really appreciate y'all hanging out with us today. The first episode we did, you can find that on the Outside the Box podcast, as well as the Performance Medicine YouTube channel. We'll link that in the description below if you want to get to know these guys a little bit better. But today's topic, I want to be really focused, and it's something that I think hopefully will help a lot of people out there. We're going to talk about the myths around exercise, and we're going to go over 4 to 5 of them, and kind of hopefully dispel some of them for the people watching or listening on the podcast. So, Josh, let's start with let's just go over the first myth that kind of comes to your mind when you hear like. Yes, a lot of people believe this to be true, but actually it's not.
I think the one that comes to mind instantly is knees over toes and how that's bad, and you should never squat and have your knee go over your toes. And in PT school, that's something that's even harped on, with us is, always keep a vertical shin, never allow that, that tibia, your shin bone to travel forward. And I mean, that's just not the case. There's been a lot of research coming out now that the more range of motion you have, the better muscle activation you're going to have in your quad, hip flexors, all the above, and just a better training, response that you're going to have. Because if you limit that range of motion, you're kind of putting all the bias towards your hips, your posterior chain, and you're leaving a lot to be, a lot left on the table for your quads. And that's something that you're going to have your motor control and your stability in your knees for any type of, athletic endeavor that you're going to be doing, or just getting up from a chair. I mean, try to, stand up with your shins completely vertical. It's not going to look very pretty. But, with knees over toes guy, he's been like blowing up here lately on social media. That's something that has been a little bit more so talked about, and especially in kind of PT world and strength conditioning, which is where we're at. We try to preach that you're not going to get knee bola if your knee travels over your toe, so it's going to be okay. Everything's going to work out just fine. So
in terms of protecting your knee, what are some things that people need to watch out for? Because I think a lot of times when people are working out, that is the one thing they're trying not to do, is they're trying not to let their knees go over their toes. You guys are saying, and I think there's plenty of evidence that support what you're saying around how full range of motion, knees over your toes it actually protects your knee. What are some things that we do want to avoid in order to protect our knee?
I think one of the big things is, you'll see some people going to the gym, just gung-ho about it, wanting to start squatting, deadlifting, doing all these exercises with inappropriate volume. So they might do too much, and then in a few weeks' time, they'll have tendonitis, and they'll look back at what they've done and feel like, well, that exercise is what's caused it. Well, no, you weren't training appropriately. Too much volume too soon, exceeded tissue capacity, and that's how it can lead to injury. So what we'd want to do with people in that situation, we want to go knees over toes, but at the same time, we want to build it up an appropriate program. And maybe knees over toes to start out with might be a little bit aggravating. Could be the quads are too weak, a deficit in the glutes somewhere here or there. So we could do more exercises, more variations of a squat. For example, we could do a goblet squat with a dumbbell or kettlebell. That's going to keep the shin more vertical, kind of like what Josh mentioned earlier. And then as we start to get stronger, we can start progressing those exercises from a goblet squat to a front squat to a back squat, where you're going to have a lot of knee over toe angle. So those are some of the things that we want to look at, just make sure we're hitting all of our marks before we just send somebody out there to do some of these exercises.
I like that. Just kind of progress towards the knees over toes and the full range of motion. And would this work for all joints, like any sort of movement? Is that how we would describe it?
Yeah, for sure. It's something that, graded exposure is kind of what we want. And if you do too much too soon, like Zach said, at any joint, it's going to probably flare up, and it's going to be, the check engine light is going to kind of pop on. And then that's whenever you kind of try to put your head down and drive through it, that's whenever you're going to have some issues. That's where we come in to kind of manage that load as I look into the camera. And, we come in to, try to lead from the front and kind of guide everyone through that. that to get the best outcome possible. Whether that's decreasing pain, be able to get back to a sport or activity that you've not been able to do for a long time because of the knee pain, shoulder pain, whatever. But yeah, full range of motion is always, always, always the goal.
Full range of motion is the end goal. You progress your way towards it. Let's go to the second myth. What do you think, Zach?
I think posture.
Okay.
A lot of people correlate bad posture can result in increased risk for injury. While there could be a little bit of a risk, that's not inherently what's the issue. You'll have people that could deadlift 400 or 500 pounds. The spine's going to flex no matter what. You cannot maintain a neutral spine the entire time throughout the lift. So yes, if someone has a little bit of rounded back when they're pulling up, that's okay. Now, if it's really excessive and they keep doing that over time, we might want to look at that and see maybe they've got a limitation at their ankle with dorsiflexion. Maybe they have a hip limitation with internal and external rotation. And inherently throughout the day, a lot of people sitting at desk jobs, rounded shoulders, typing on keyboards all day will contribute that to their back pain, when in reality, that's not the case. They're just not strong enough to hold themselves up in the appropriate position. I share the same belief that there's no really good posture or bad posture. The next posture is the best posture. So you really don't want to stay in the same posture too long. You want to switch it up about every 30 minutes or so. So if you're at a desk, get up, stretch, move around and stuff. That can help prevent some pain, but also just getting in the gym and working out and just building up strength. Doesn't matter if it's in your back, your legs, or your glutes. Those are one of the big things. So
what I'm hearing there is, one, you want to having a rounded back in a deadlift or in some sort of I guess just a deadlift.
Yeah, like a lifting motion.
Is not necessarily a bad thing.
Correct.
What are you trying to focus on when you're doing a deadlift? If it's not, because I've always actually, when I'm doing a deadlift, I've tried to get my, chest up, not necessarily around a flexion in my lower back, but just really a straight back. What are we after there?
Yeah, so I think a lot of that is the cueing. So chest up is a good cue, but typically is what we end up seeing with the chest up cue is we lead here, obviously with the chest, and when we do that, our kind of sternum is going to arch up, and then we over arch in the lower back. Then we fire up all those spinal erectors, and they're just going to be tightened up under load and then in a bad position. And that's whenever some low back pain can start, especially if you're doing terrible volume like Zach was talking about earlier, to where you're doing, say, deadlifts or squats with that form several times throughout the week, and that can just add up and kind of put miles on that low back and those erectors. So typically is what we like to say is start with a good brace. So you want to try to fill up your belly with 360 degrees of air. So it's not really like that, but you want to try to lock in your ribs. We try to say tuck your lower ribs in your front pockets. So that way you're kind of bracing. Imagine Mike Tyson's going to punch you right in the stomach. Okay. Just because you won't be like all flabby when Tyson punches you. He's going to go through you. You know what I mean? So you want to make sure that you're braced really, really good. And what that's going to do, that's going to prevent that overarching. And then you can almost imagine, almost driving your shoulder blades into your back pockets. So then you try to pull the bar into you if you're back squatting, or vice versa. If you're trying to pull a bar from the floor, you're trying to just squeeze as hard as you can in your upper back and keep everything as tight as possible. Now, as what Zach was saying with that little bit of flexion is that may happen if the load is just too much.
Got it.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, it can happen, but what is bad is if that happens and you're in a poor position. So we try to train in that. So there's a lift now called the Jefferson curl that is huge right now on kind of our realm and social media. And that's basically where you do a deadlift on an elevated surface with the dumbbells in front of you, and you do a full-blown flexion all the way down. So you tuck your chin, round your back first. Your entire back just looks like a crane. And then you reach as far down as you can to the floor.
And you're pulling from that position? Pulling weights?
So dumbbells in front of you. Now, it's light, but the idea is that you let your lower back get used to that positioning. That way, if you get in that position, which you will when it's heavy, your body knows how to respond. Because if not, then everything's going to lock up and you're going to be, hurting for a while.
So really, the key here is the ability to be strong in any position. Yes. So not being super dependent on like a perfectly straight back. Okay, again, kind of functional. Yep. That's super fascinating.
There's wiggle room, plus or minus on either side of that.
But you're not saying like having a round back is good or bad, because I'm looking, you guys both have good posture, which, stand up straight, that sort of thing. You're still advocating for that, but don't necessarily worry about that during a lift. There's other cues. Am I hearing you right?
Yeah, for sure. Like what Josh mentioned, if you go by the proper cueing, like what he was talking about, engaging the lats, keeping that chest up 360 degrees of air throughout your entire core, more than likely that's going to prevent you from getting into those positions, especially with lighter to moderate weight. Now, obviously, as you progress to heavier weight, you might see a little bit of a difference. But like Josh said with the Jefferson curl, strengthening that back, that neuromuscular connection, letting the body know, hey, it's okay to get in this position.
Yep. Then
you've got wiggle room on each side, like Josh alluded to.
I like the Jefferson curl. I haven't heard of that.
Yeah. And then another thing too with that, talking about kind of low back pain and intra-abdominal pressure, is using a belt. So a lot of people use that as like a crutch, or they think like I was taught in high school that always put on a belt whenever you're about to lift heavy, and that's okay, that's good, but it's not to help support and keep you upright. It's more so it should be a cue to push out into that belt and create that 360 degree pressure. Because you can almost blow I think about pushing your belly button out into the belt, not just trying to depend on it to do what your core is supposed to do.
Yeah.
And support you upright.
What do you guys, because a lot of times there'll be exercise where you try to pull your belly button into your spine. Mm-hmm. What is that? That flattens out the lower back? Is that what that does?
Pretty much, yeah. I'll let you take the lead on that one.
Yeah, I mean, that's another cue, kind of what we were talking about with the chest up, that we can use to kind of get our rectus abdominis, so those ab muscles engaged. And, again, we kind of use tucking your ribs, your lower ribs in your front pockets. And then if you do a forceful exhale, then your abs are going to automatically engage because they're muscles of expiration as well.
Okay.
So yeah, that's a good cue. It's a little bit harder whenever you're standing up for people to kind of comprehend that cue, but it's not bad. And that's the whole thing with this, entire, the way that we preach and operate is no movement is bad, no cue is bad. There's always wiggle room. And if it works for you, that's great. Just make it optimal for you. That's kind of where we come in to kind of, dial that in. Nice.
All right, let's go to are we at the third myth?
Yeah.
All right, what's the third myth?
I mean, the one that I think about the most is that pain equals injury. So that you get, like I mentioned earlier, that service engine soon light comes on. You're like, oh my gosh, I need to go get imaging. I have, bulge the disc. I need to shut down all movement. And then everybody just walks around like this and is terrified to move. Whereas, the pain system in our bodies is so complicated. I mean, they're still trying to, people smarter than us are, trying to figure that out as far as the pain signals that travel from your brain to the site where you're feeling it. Because a lot of times we can get what's called referred pain, which means that that's not even where the injury is. Like, you could be having some, spinal issue up here that can refer down to your shoulder or something like that. But the point in saying that is it's not your shoulder that's hurt. So it's okay to still move through those motions, but know what could provoke them. Certain positions that you get in. So that's where we kind of come in to, like we said, like Zach said earlier, he said it perfect. We can, slowly introduce these motions in the appropriate ways with the appropriate load. That way it doesn't flare it up. So basically, rest is not the answer, correct. To these injuries. If anything, you're going to get stiffer, you're going to get more fear avoidant of movements, which is even worse because that's going to make you even more stiffer, more stiffer. I wasn't a English major clearly, but yeah, I mean it's something that we just try to move through those ranges of motion like we alluded to earlier in a safe, pain-free range. And there's thresholds to our pain. So we have like that 0 to 10, numeric pain rating scale that we are harped on in PT school, and you probably heard at the doctor's office as well. We don't want to hover up into that 4, 5, 6 range. Right. That no pain, no gain is not what we're after. It may be uncomfortable, but once we're reaching pain, then we might exceed tissue tolerance, and then injury may actually occur. So there's ways that we can kind of, slowly navigate that safely.
Yeah, I like that. What I'm hearing from you guys is don't let a little pain be an excuse to not move, because not moving will lead to stiffness and possibly even more pain down the road. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, because the body can basically be like, I'm going to lock up this area, and then it has to compensate other places. So.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of like what, Josh alluded to, if individuals are having pain, we want them to move through that pain-free range of motion, because when you're moving through that range of motion, you're still getting blood flow to it, delivering nutrients to that muscle, and you're kind of unlocking it. It's like a puzzle. You're unlocking it. Your brain muscle connection is like, okay, this is okay. You're showing your brain that, hey, we can do this. There's not going to be injury to occur. You just got to be smart about it. Move through that pain-free range of motion. If you're doing an exercise and you get to a certain part and you start to feel that increase, all right, there's your range. Move through there. We'll progress through that, and then over time we'll be able to get back to the exercise that maybe you had pain with, but now we've located, maybe there's a deficit here, maybe this muscle's a little bit weaker. Work on that, and then we've unlocked the puzzle.
That's super fascinating. Is there any advice you for the people who might have pain in some area but still want to go to the gym? Are you saying find that range of motion where there is no pain, work through that, and then progress to full motion eventually, and maybe try and find weak areas that might be causing the pain in the first place? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, you are. Last thing I'd want somebody to do is just rest, quit exercising at all. We hear that all the time. My friend told me not to do this. My other therapist or my doctor told me not to exercise at all. And I heard that recently with one of my evaluations. She said, I went to the doctor and they told me rest, don't do anything for 2 weeks. And while, I'm not going to undermine a doctor by any means, the last thing we want to do is that we want to do easy exercises. So if you had a bout of low back pain, something simple is just going for a walk, doing some mobility drills, doing some stretching, some loading in certain ranges of motion until that pain gradually decreases. That's one of the best things you can do instead of just sitting on the couch.
Two things I just want to clarify. When you say loading, does that mean weight bearing? Is that what loading means?
Yeah, weight bearing, or you can have a barbell, kettlebell, dumbbell.
Any external load.
Yep.
Yeah, that you're putting your hands on your back.
Got it.
Like that. Yep, or on a machine.
And the other thing you guys have mentioned a couple times is tissue tolerance. What is that exactly? I think I know, but I want to hear what y'all say about it.
Yeah. So tissue tolerance is basically whatever muscle group you're training. So whichever muscle group you're trying to do with whatever movement. So like a leg extension is kind of kicking the leg out. If you're having some knee issues, then it's the amount of tolerance. Hence the name, right? That quad can handle safely. Because a lot of times, if say somebody were to get on a leg extension machine and put on like 300 pounds,
right,
then that would exceed the tissue tolerance, and you're more likelihood, to be injured or to have some sort of red light come on. So that's kind of a way that we can work, within that pain-free motion, like Zach was talking about. But it goes for the load as well. So there's ways that we can look at that with reps in reserve, meaning how many reps you have left in the tank. So that's a way that we look at with our programming, is because we do a lot of like our home exercise programming is more remote. Yeah. So we maybe have 1 or 2 visits during the week, and then we have exercises for the patients to work on. Yeah. Well, if we're not physically there, we can't be coaching to be like, don't put that right, that much weight there. So we operate that way with reps in reserve to be like, okay, I could do 3 more with that weight. And if that's the sweet spot right there, 2 to 3 reps left after your set, then you're probably in a tolerable range for load. But yeah, that's the hard part, because it's hard to know how many you would have left without getting to that point.
Yeah,
so that's kind of where we come in. We try to get to that point before we start doing reps in reserve with our patients.
Yeah, I find that super fascinating, because I think in yoga speak it's called like getting to your edge, and like making sure you don't go past it, but also kind of making sure you get there. Yep. And what you're saying is 2 to 3 left. You feel like that's kind of a safe point. Your tissue tolerance would be able to handle that weight. Yep. All right, guys, let's get to the next myth here. Myth around exercise. Where are we at? We're at number 4.
Yeah. And we kind of merged a couple of them together.
There's a lot of myths. There's a lot of myths.
There are several. One big thing is SHOEWARE. That's kind of what we see a lot of. You've got Hokas that are pretty much like attaching a pillow to your feet, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. They feel great. And then you've got minimalist shoes, which is what I'm wearing, that feel like I'm basically barefoot all the time, and I have like a little bit of rubber, like separating me from the ground. So it's all about preference with that as well. But when it comes to these big weight-bearing, huge multi-joint movements like the squat, like the deadlift, you don't necessarily want to be in some of those shoes. So like the Hokas that kind of have like a bunch of movement, or anything else, Brooks, whatever, those are not the best, because you're going to have a lot of, added instability to your foot and ankle that can translate all the way up, and that could even make your lower back tighten up, because it's your body's sensing some instability. So it's like, we just need to tighten up and have nervous system take over. So we typically try to start people out barefoot. That way they can feel the ground, and we teach a tripod foot. So pushing the big toe down, little toe and heel, gripping the ground. So that way you're creating, pressure across your arch and creating a nice stable base, because everything starts from the ground up. So we do that, and then if we're limited in, say, ankle dorsiflexion, so the ability for your toes to come up or your knee travel over your toes, which is what we talked about earlier, if there's a limitation in your ankle joint, then we can work on that, or even elevate the heel slightly. So if you see some of these Olympic weightlifters that have the kind of, it's basically heels that are like added to the bottom in the back, that kind of, this is your heel, like elevates it, then that's what that's going to do, is allow your knee to travel further without that added pain. So
I didn't realize, I'm picturing weightlifting shoes in my head, and they do have that heel, and I didn't realize that is kind of not a natural, but a shoe version of like those, what they call an elevation board,
slant board. Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
That makes so much sense with squats. So do you guys use those types of weightlifting shoes when you're lifting, or just straight flat?
Unfortunately, grad school left us a little bit broke, so I've not been able to purchase those yet, because they're pretty pricey, and two, it's like it's such a niche item that you can only use for Olympic weightlifting, really.
Right.
So we have slant boards that we typically use with our patients and with ourselves, but you can, even if you don't have those or have the funds, you can just get like a 2.5 pound plate or 5 pound plate, put it on your heel, just kind of be there in that position, play around with the width of your squat, and kind of go from there.
Is there a safe way? Because I've done a little bit of barefoot training, but it's mainly been walking and every once in a while running, and it really hurt my feet. Mm-hmm. Is there? I know you guys are talking about in the gym where you're lifting barefoot. Is there any? Because most people's feet are weak because they're in Hokas or they're in shoes all day. Mm-hmm. How do you go about, how would you progress to having strong feet? Does that make any sense what I'm saying?
It does. I mean, it kind of goes back to the graded exposure. So you've got so many layers of muscle in the bottom of your foot. So intrinsic muscles, do different exercise with that. Put a bunch of marbles down on the floor, pick them up, towel crunches, different things like that to help strengthen that. And then just greater exposure with your walking, whether that be on a treadmill, outside. It might be more comfortable to walk on the grass barefoot first, where you've got a little bit more softer area. And then, if you want to walk barefoot on sidewalk or asphalt, sure, go for it. But those are some big things that you can do with that. The foot is no different than any other muscle or joint in the body. It has to be strong in order to support itself. I
actually think foot strength is underrated. Based on what I've seen in my own life, I feel like a lot of my injuries can be traced back to weak feet, which is interesting.
Well, and then just the shape of shoes traditionally, I used to wear Vans and still do the Vans slip-on shoes because I'm lazy and don't want to tie my shoes. And they just, jam your feet. That's where we can look at bunions or something like that. But if, as we age, we're going to lose our, proprioception, which is the ability for the body to feel the ground and move body in space. So that's going to be higher risk of falls. So something that we look at with the barefoot training in our older adult population that we work with, we're obviously going to be weightlifting, but even just, doing some sort of, not necessarily loading pattern, but we can look at duration in barefoot, training. So like Zach was talking about, if we're walking, not look at reps or weight like we typically use in the gym, but time and duration. So if we do kind of what you think about if you were having a boot and you injured your ankle, we want to do a weaning schedule. Mm-hmm. So kind of be this many hours out of the boot. Because if you try to do it all at one time, like I have with these shoes at the nursing home, I don't practice what I preach evidently, then my feet are going to be killing me because I don't realize how much heel strike I have, or I overstride or whatever. You're going to feel things that you've not felt barefoot training because of the shoes that you wear. And there's nothing wrong with the Hokas or anything like that. I want everybody to know that. We're not bashing those. They have their place. But I think there should be a lot more people that are either barefoot training or in minimalist shoes for more hours out of the day.
I like that, and it's almost, you can almost gamify it in a little bit. Make it say, okay, for 1 hour today, I'm gonna walk around the house barefoot, which is odd. I don't do that at all. Like my barefoot duration time is minimal. It's low.
Same.
All right, let's get to the fifth and last myth of today's episode. Where are we at? We got a fifth one?
Yeah, I think this one kind of goes outside of the weight room, but I think just because you have a pain does not mean you have to have an imaging. There's so much research that you see that, even people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, if you were taking an MRI of their back, they're probably going to have a bulging disc. It's just not symptomatic at the time. So I have to debunk that myth, especially at an assisted living facility or with my older clients every single day, that if they get the least little bit of pain, they feel like they have to go spend $2,000 to get an MRI. It's like, well, let's not do that.
Yeah.
Let's calm it down, build up strength, and progress from there. Over time, if we're not making much progress, then we'll refer out, get an image, and just see what's going on. But I do not feel like that needs to be the first line of defense. Is go get imaging, try therapy, try strength training first, and then we'll go from there. That's
really fascinating because I know, especially as we get older, we're more prone to injury. I'm guessing just because of lifestyle stuff. And we get worried if we felt something twinge or something like that, and the immediate thing we want to do is like, oh, I need to see what I did. You would think that'd be like a protective measure, but what you're saying is that's not the first thing we do. The first thing we do is, get checked out, maybe start some therapy to continue strength training, stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there are some situations where you want to go get imaging or go straight to it. We would take somebody through an eval if we saw some red flags that were very serious, and we'd refer out immediately. But if we go through a screen, no red flags, no serious injuries, work them out, calm down the area, and then we just progress their strength, progress their tolerance, and then eventually get them back to the activity or the weightlifting or weight lift that they would like to do.
That's super fascinating. Man, well, we've debunked 5 myths today around strength and exercise. Guys, I really appreciate y'all stopping by the show and helping us, because I like 3 to 4 of these, I was like, man, I didn't know. Like, I wasn't sure about how I felt about them, because you know what you read and what you've been brought up on, especially in athletics as a kid. So I appreciate you guys stopping in.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Real quick, TriStar Strength and Rehab. Tell everybody where they can find you. You guys are putting out some really cool videos on TikTok and Instagram. Give them your handle. Let us know where people can find more of you guys.
Yeah, on Instagram, it is TriStar Strength X Rehab. And then we're also on Facebook as well. We're trying to put out some good content, but some funny stuff too. So we try to be entertaining as possible. As you can tell, we're pretty laid back. But yeah, I mean, we're definitely trying to be more consistent with our posts and get out there a little bit more. So we're also doing half-off evals right now.
Nice.
So if anybody's interested or having general aches and pains, definitely give us a holler.
Nice. Zach Jackson, Josh Davis. I did not mess it up. TriStar Strength and Rehab. Guys, check them out. Thank you all so much for hanging out with us for the 4 to 5 myths around exercise in this episode. As always, we'll see y'all next time.
Don't go away.